This is a small sled I made specifically for cutting 45-degree bevels on a piece of wood like that. I needed to cut a lot of them, and this was going to be the most accurate way to do it. I didn't record the actual construction of this. That's pretty normal woodworking stuff, but I'll kind of explain the assembly process. So I started with a piece of 2 foot by 4 foot 3/4 inch plywood. I think it's Baltic birch type of stuff where it's clear on both sides. And I cut out a piece just about as long as my table saw. Then I cut out some strips from that and I glued them together to make the two ends of the table. Now on this end, which the wood rests against, I wanted to get that really flat, and I saw a good tip on a video online where the woodworker clamped these against a level to hold it flat, so when you put these two sides together you end up with a really flat surface, because these can bow, stuff like that. So I put that on there, glued it together. Now the reason I put this second one on here, you really don't need this one up top, but the reason I did was this board, a piece of plywood, had a little bow in it, and having this extra piece up there kind of takes a little bit of the bow out. It still has maybe a 64th or something, 10,000ths of an inch or something bow. So I got my board. Before I put the ends on, while this was drying, these two pieces, I cut some plastic. Now this is Delrin or acetal. This is really expensive. This piece, before I started cutting on it, was almost $100. So, but I had it scrapped, so that's what I used. So I cut a strip of it, and then made sure it was the width of the slot, and then it's actually thicker than the slot. So I just ran it through my wood planer, and that worked fine until I got it the depth, thickness I needed. And then I drilled holes in it every 4 inches and countersunk those holes. The next thing I did was, with this piece of plywood, I needed to cut this slot. And rather than setting up a dado blade and doing all that, it was just quicker to just make a whole bunch of cuts, maybe 8 cuts with the blade, and just move the fence over each time until I got it the width of this T-track. Once I got it the width of the T-track, it left a little bit of a rough surface on the bottom, so I just took a chisel, and instead of like chiseling at it, I just kind of used it as a scraper and just scraped along the slot until I got it level and made sure that the T-track was below the surface. Now with this slot done, the next thing to do was put this piece of plastic on. So to do that, I put some pennies in this slot, put the T-track down, put some super glue on it, put my wood down. I ran my fence over so that the wood was square to the track, and then I pushed down on it and let it set up. Then once it set up for a couple minutes, picked it up, flipped it over, and I have these centering drills. And the way they work is there's the outside shell here fits into the countersunk hole, and then when you drill, it retracts and the drill comes through and will drill the pilot hole for you dead center of the hole. So I drilled those and then put in some short 100-degree tapered screws. So now I got this plastic on. Then it was just install the track, do the same thing, use a centering drill, start the holes, put my screws in, and then I could install my clamp. Now the next part was to put these ends on. I put this one on first. Again, it's not really doing anything other than holding this from warping a little. This end, which your wood stop is going to be, I took my block plane and cut a little bevel in the bottom to keep the sawdust from holding the wood away from the back. I did that first, and then I put one screw in each end of this base, this backstop, I should say, as square as I could. I put a square along the fence. I'll show you. So just get a square like this, put it on the fence, then hold it against this board, and just kind of get an idea for where this should be. Now, to get this perfectly square with the saw, what you need to do is, there's several different ways, but the most common way is you do what's called the 5-cut method, where you take a piece of wood fairly large that will fit in here, because the larger it is, the more accurate you can be, and you cut it 5 times, rotating it 90 degrees each time. On the 5th cut, that piece that you have left, you only cut like 1/4 inch off or something, but the last piece, the taper of that piece tells you how much this back needs to move. So you measure the length, and let's say I ended up with a piece, this is almost 12 inches, and the taper is 40 thousandths. You divide that by 4 because you cut 4 sides, so 10 thousandths. So that tells you that this back piece needs to move 10 thousandths. Then you take and clamp, you clamp a straight edge to the board, and then take the screw out of the bottom, take a feeler gauge and move it 10 thousandths of an inch. You have to move it in the proper direction, and that's determined by your taper. And then you put the screw in the bottom back in here in a new location. And you can see in here, let's see, yeah, right there. You see how many times I had to do it to get it perfect. And then once I got it perfect, I put some more screws, 3 more screws in there to hold it there. But I got it within, when my 5th cut over 12 inches was 6 thousandths of an inch taper, which would mean that this is off by 1.5 thousandths, and you just can't make that kind of adjustment in wood. The screw tends to follow the grain a little bit. But anyway, I'm real happy with it. So I got that square. Then what I did is run my blade up, and then tilted it at a 45. Let's pretend that's an actual 45. And I took my sled and ran it through, and that cut this bevel and this bevel in here. And then I just took a jigsaw and cut this vertical part here to clean it up. Move it back down. And I like to keep the blade down when I'm not using it because it's awful sharp and I don't want to cut myself. Then when you're gonna use this, you put your board you want to cut in here, and this edge is really close to where it's going to be. Take your clamp and put it in there, and then just run it through. Now, I made this end a little shorter than what I see most people do on their ends here, because I found it was more comfortable. Like, you've got this clamp, but you still want to hold on to the wood. So this gives me a little better clamping pressure on thin pieces of wood than when it was thicker. I initially made this 3.5 inches and it was just too tall, so I shortened it. So this is my 45-degree sled. Just trying to give you some ideas on something you can build. I built it just for this project that we're doing, cutting all these 45s. It only took maybe an hour or two to make up. The other thing is I went ahead and finished this with some clear shellac. Actually, it was clear lacquer. I wanted just to seal it from the moisture. I have a tendency, because where I'm at, the moisture gets into the wood and starts warping it. So this will help it last a little longer, especially when it's in storage.